I have a question, please, for the gentleman from Todd.
He will yield a question.
Gentlemen, I'd like to talk about foster care. I am a former foster parent. I did this with the cabinet for 6.5 years. So I hope people can appreciate the expertise that I'm bringing to the table today. The governor had proposed $14 million for each year for our foster parents, and for our relative caregivers, $18 million in the first year of 25 and $11 million in 26. And I'm just wondering, I'm sorry, excuse me, I misspoke. The governor was proposing $14 million for foster parents and $13.5 for each fiscal year for relative. What the House budget has is $13 million for each year for foster parents and only $8 million for 25 and $11 million in 26. So my question is what information did you all have that informed you to make such a different budget recommendation?
Gentleman from Todd.
Thank you for the question, lady. There were 2 ABRs, agency budget requests, on each of those topics, one for each. We did fund a portion, I'm not sure we did full amount on the ABR, but a portion of it on foster care. Fictive kin or relative, we did not. I'm sorry, sorry, just a second. Okay. Sorry, it was partially funded. Part of it is as you have been a foster parent involved in that, I have also been a fictive kin relative parent. There's good points to those programs. Foster care is more well established than relative or fictive kin. We did lend support, but not full support. As that becomes more and more uniform across the state and better utilized, I would hope that we can find more funding for it, but we're going to have to work on the program also and its applicability and its effectiveness.
Lady from Jefferson.
Will the gentleman yield to another question, please?
He will yield.
Okay, thank you for your previous response. What I understood is that you don't feel that the program is established enough to justify the funds at the same rate that you give foster parents. Is that correct?
Gentleman Todd.
Essentially, yes. It's looking from what my experience has been. I've been in juvenile court for about 28 years plus. Seen those programs develop over time. Foster care is much longer, as well as when we read narrative form of what they're trying to do and why. Just not sure that we're there yet.
Lady from Jefferson.
Will the gentleman yield to another question, please?
He will yield.
Thank you. I asked this question also for the benefit of everyone on this House floor and anybody who's tuning in. But do you know the daily rate today to care for a child in foster care, just the basic rate that somebody formerly like myself might receive?
Gentleman from Todd.
Do not.
Okay.
Lady from Jefferson.
Thank you. May I ask another question, please?
He will yield another question.
Do you know the average length that the cabinet can retain an individual foster parent, formerly such as myself?
Gentleman from Todd.
The average length, I do not.
Lady from Jefferson.
May I speak on the bill, please?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. The daily rate, the basic daily rate, ranges between $24.10 to $26.20. And there's a range based off of the age of the child. So every day I had a child in my care, that is the rate that I was given as a foster parent, and those monies went directly to the care of that child. So I want to point that out because I think there's a lot of perceptions and conceptions about the fact that people think people get into foster care to make money, and that is simply not the case. I also want to point out the fact that the average home is open for 1 year before they close. And they close for a myriad of reasons. It's hard. It's really, really, really hard work to raise children. I'm sure many people in this body understand that. It's incredibly challenging to raise children who you have not had the privilege of caring for from day one. and you're doing a lot of remediation on those kiddos across the board for a lot of things and trying to do your best to make these kids whole. I'd like to just take a minute to share with you guys a story that I think is really relevant to why I would like to see our relative caregivers be raised to the same rate that our foster parents are. My very first placement was a sibling group. We will call them Chris and Katie. And Chris and Katie were 11 and 7. And I happened to have biological children that were actually 11 and 7. So I thought, well, this should be good. We have 2 sets of twins virtually now. And I think the important thing that I want to tell you all about this particular placement that I got is that after they had been with us for maybe a month and had warmed up, I was talking to Chris, the 11-year-old boy, and he began to tell me about his story and kind of how he ended up there. And something that I thought was incredibly heartbreaking and poignant is that he said that they started off together, he and his sister, and yet another sister, a third sister that we never even knew anything about. I literally found out there was another sister from the child, saying that all 3 of them started off together because an aunt took them. And what was so heartbreaking about this particular situation is he said, and she was the one with the least. She had the least means, and she was the only one that would stand up and take us. And then as he continued to tell the story, time went by and it was like, I can't take care of all 3 of you. So then he was removed and put into foster care. And then it was just the 2 girls left. And then things continued to stay hard. And then the middle child was put in a separate home, not even the home with where her brother was, until it was just the littlest one, who was 3, that was left. And eventually even she was put into a different home. And so I tell this story because I feel it is important for people to just take a moment and reflect about how life-changing it must be if your circumstances are so bad that the state has to come in and remove you from the only family that you know, and then to compound that issue, you can't even stay with your siblings the majority of the time, because there's a lot of people out there that will take 1 kid. There's not a lot of people out there that will take sibling groups. So I just would like to ask that we consider moving forward in this budget for the rates to be raised for these families. Children will always do better, and the research supports this, if they can stay with a family member. It is traumatizing enough to be removed from your home, but then to come into the foster care system is traumatizing within itself, even if you get lucky and land in a good home. And the average kid has at least 4 placements. And I think in all the years that we opened our home, and I think we had the privilege of caring for about 16 kids in that time, I think I only had 1 or 2 kids who had less than 4 moves. So 4 is the average, but that wasn't my experience in my household with the kids that came. Because a lot of times we had older kids in our house, and teenagers are really scary for people, and they make it harder to get those placements. And every time those kids get rejected and they have to leave that home and get placed in another home, that's traumatizing for those kids, and it sets them back. It sets them back from an educational standpoint. Every time a kid changes school, they lose 3 months of instruction. So what does that tell you when we've got kids bouncing around the state not even sometimes in their own county, because we don't have enough homes. So I just want to make the case that this is something that we need to look at. The amount of kids that we have in foster care is staggering. And if there's anything we can do to make sure that those kids can go to a relative and that those relatives can get the same support, that is going to benefit that child in the long run and change their trajectory. I was a good home, but guess what? I am not a replacement for an aunt or a grandparent or any other member of a family who would be willing to stand up and take the responsibility of loving that kid. It also helps to make sure that the kids can stay together. And it also is important for children to maintain their cultural identity and community connections and fostering a sense of belonging. And they lose that every time a social worker has to show up, put their belongings, what few they have, in a trash bag and move them to another home. So we can break this cycle if we are willing to support the families who are also willing to step up and say, I will care for this child. Thank you so much.